Listen, April 2nd, 2025, 48 hours. That's all it took for $6 trillion in American wealth to vanish into thin air. Not slowly, not gradually, gone. In 2 days, the United States stock market experienced the single largest wealth destruction event in its entire history. Apple lost nearly $500 billion. Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet, Tesla, Nvidia. The so-called Magnificent Seven collectively shed $1.8 trillion. The Dow Jones plummeted 2,231 points in a single trading session. The Nasdaq crashed so hard it entered bear market territory before most people even understood what was happening. And here's what makes this terrifying. This wasn't caused by a natural disaster. No earthquake, no hurricane. This wasn't a pandemic shutting down the global economy. This wasn't even a banking crisis or a housing market collapse. This was a tariff announcement. Just policy, just words on paper. China retaliated with tariffs that peaked at 125% before settling at 84%. And what followed didn't just destroy wealth. It exposed something far more dangerous, a pattern. A pattern so mathematically precise, so historically consistent, so brutally predictable, that if you don't understand it right now, you're going to get absolutely crushed by what's coming next. Before I go any further, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now, tap the bell icon, because what I'm about to show you isn't just another economic analysis. This is the blueprint, the exact mechanism that's destroyed economic empires for the past 200 years. And it's happening to America right now in real time while you're watching this video. The people who understand this pattern are already repositioning. The people who don't are about to lose everything. So subscribe to Money Aftermath, because I'm going to make sure you're on the right side of what's coming. This isn't about Republicans versus Democrats. This isn't about whether you love or hate any particular politician. This is about understanding a machine. A mechanism that operates with cold mathematical precision regardless of who's in power, regardless of intentions, regardless of what anyone believes should happen. I'm going to prove to you with absolute clarity that what happened in April wasn't a surprise. It was inevitable, the logical, predictable conclusion of a sequence that started decades ago. And unless something changes immediately, the worst part is unfolding right now as you listen to my voice. There's a 4-stage pattern. Pay attention, because this is everything. Stage 1. A nation becomes an economic powerhouse through open trade, through innovation, through competitive advantage. They dominate global markets. Everyone wants their products. Their currency becomes powerful. Their companies expand worldwide. They're on top of the world. Stage 2. Political pressure starts building. Domestic industries start screaming for protection. Workers in declining sectors demand something be done. Politicians promise to bring jobs back. Protectionist measures get implemented gradually. First a little tariff here, then another one there. It seems reasonable. It seems like you're just leveling the playing field. Stage 3. This is where everything explodes. Aggressive tariffs trigger massive retaliation. Your trading partners don't just accept it. They can't. Their own domestic industries pressure their own politicians the exact same way. They respond with equal or greater force. Trade collapses overnight. Markets panic. Wealth evaporates. Supply chains that took decades to build disintegrate in weeks. Stage 4. Economic isolation becomes permanent. The former economic leader loses its dominance forever. Competitors rush in to fill the vacuum. New trading relationships form that exclude you. Supply chains get rebuilt around you, not through you. And it's over. You don't recover from this. Not quickly. Sometimes not ever. Now I know what you're thinking. This sounds like theory. This sounds like academic speculation. But it's not. This is history repeating itself with mechanical precision. I'm going to walk you through 3 separate historical disasters. 3 different countries. 3 different time periods. Each one following this exact pattern, step by step, beat by beat. And then I'm going to show you how America is currently executing the same sequence. And when you see it, you cannot unsee it. It will change how you view everything that's happening right now. June 17th, 1930. President Herbert Hoover sits at his desk and signs the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act into law, named after Senator Reed Smoot and Representative Willis Hawley. This law raised tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. 20,000. The stated goal was protecting American farmers and industries during the early stages of the Great Depression. The result? They made everything catastrophically worse. But let's back up. The first stage had already happened years before. The United States came out of World War I as the world's premier economic power. Undisputed. By the 1920s, America was the engine driving global trade. In 1929, U.S. exports to Europe hit $2.3 billion. Imports from Europe were $1.3 billion. The machine was humming. The foundation was rock solid. American innovation was dominating. American products were everywhere. The economy looked unstoppable. Then the second stage kicked in. American farmers were getting destroyed. Throughout the 1920s, they overproduced. More supply than demand meant falling prices. They couldn't make ends meet. They screened for protection from their government. Herbert Hoover, during his 1928 presidential campaign, promised to raise tariffs on agricultural products to help them. He won. Once he got into office, manufacturing lobbies jumped in. What started as farm relief transformed into a comprehensive protectionist overhaul. The political pressure became overwhelming. Everyone wanted protection. Everyone wanted their industry saved. Third stage, the escalation. Smoot-Hawley pushed average import duties from 40% to nearly 60%, a 20 percentage point jump. Think about that. Before Hoover even signed the bill, 23 trading partners had already sent official protest notes to Washington. The warnings were everywhere. Economists screamed. Business leaders begged him not to do it. The administration ignored every single warning. Within months, Canada, America's closest trading partner and ally, slammed tariffs on 16 key products, accounting for 30% of U.S. exports to Canada. Then Mexico retaliated, France retaliated, Italy, Spain, Argentina, Australia, Switzerland, Germany. The retaliations cascaded like dominoes. More than 10,000 economists signed a petition begging Hoover to veto the bill. 10,000 experts telling him this would be a disaster. Henry Ford personally went to the White House, called it economic stupidity to Hoover's face. Thomas Lamont from J.P. Morgan said he almost went down on his knees to beg the president to stop. But political pressure won. Hoover signed it anyway. The aftermath was catastrophic. Let me give you the numbers, because numbers don't lie. U.S. exports to Europe collapsed from $2.3 billion in 1929 to $784 million by 1932. That's a 66% decline in just 3 years. Imports from Europe fell from $1.3 billion to $390 million. Overall, global trade shrank by 66% between 1929 and 1934. American farm exports, the very sector that tariffs were supposed to protect, fell by 1/3. Total U.S. exports plummeted from $7 billion in 1929 to $2.5 billion in 1932, a 64% collapse. Fourth stage, permanent damage. The destruction wasn't just economic, it was structural. It changed the world. Smoot-Hawley destroyed international trade relationships that had taken decades to build. It contributed to the economic nationalism that defined the 1930s. Some historians argue it created the fertile ground for extremist leaders like Adolf Hitler to rise to power. The United States didn't return to anything resembling free trade until the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934. By then, the global economic order had fundamentally changed forever. Unemployment was 8% when Smoot-Hawley passed. It jumped to 16% in 1931. By 1932 and 1933, it reached 25%. 1 in every 4 Americans couldn't find work. The tariff didn't cause the Great Depression outright, but it transformed a severe recession into a decade-long catastrophe. The pattern was clear. First clear example. Let me take you back even further. Britain in the early 1800s. The Napoleonic Wars end in 1815, and Britain is the undisputed global economic superpower. Stage 1 complete. For decades, Britain built its economic power on maritime trade, industrial innovation, and a relatively open trading system. Britain dominated global commerce. Ships flying the Union Jack controlled the seas. The sun never set on the British Empire. They were invincible. But when the Napoleonic Wars ended, cheap grain from Europe started flooding British markets. British landowners, who controlled Parliament, panicked. Their profits were at risk. Stage 2. In 1815, Parliament passed the Corn Laws, heavy duties on imported grain. The stated goal was protecting British agriculture and ensuring food security. The real goal? Protecting the wealth of the landed aristocracy. These tariffs made bread, the staple food of working-class Britons, prohibitively expensive. Landowners got rich, ordinary people suffered and starved. Stage 3. Political and economic tension built over 3 decades. The Anti-Corn Law League, founded in 1838, organized massive public campaigns. Their argument was simple and devastating. Protectionism was strangling British industry by raising costs and provoking retaliation from trading partners. European nations started imposing their own tariffs on British manufactured goods in direct response to Britain's agricultural protectionism. British exports began declining. The trade war was escalating year after year. China hit back with its own tariffs, averaging 21% on U.S. goods by February 2020, up from 8% before the trade war started. The pattern was beginning. The Phase 1 trade deal signed in January 2020 was supposed to de-escalate tensions. China committed to buying $200 billion in additional U.S. goods over 2 years. They never met that target, not even close. The Biden administration kept all the tariffs in place and even added more, particularly on electric vehicles and solar panels. The pressure kept building year after year. Stage 3, April 2025. This is where the pattern accelerates into full disaster mode. On February 1st, 2025, President Trump, in his second term, declared a national emergency over fentanyl trafficking. He used that declaration to impose 10% tariffs on all Chinese imports under emergency powers. On March 3rd, he raised it 20%. And then came April 2nd. Liberation Day, they called it. Trump announced reciprocal tariffs. China got hit with a 34% tariff, later raised to 54% when stacked with previous measures. But that wasn't the end. By April 9th, the U.S. had raised tariffs on Chinese goods to 145%. 145. China's response was immediate and overwhelming. On April 4th, China imposed a 34% tariff on all U.S. goods. By April 10th, that number rose to 84%. By April 12th, China announced tariffs of 125%. Then they said they'd halt further increases. The damage was done. The market reaction was immediate and absolutely devastating. On April 3rd, the Nasdaq lost 1,600 points. Worst sell-off since COVID-19. The S&P 500 lost 4.84%. The Dow fell 1,679 points. The next day, April 4th, the carnage continued and got worse. The Dow plunged another 2,231 points. That's a 5.5% drop in one single day, the largest single-day point lost since June 2020. The S&P 500 dropped 5.97%, worst day since March 2020 when the pandemic first hit. For the first time in history, the Dow shed more than 1,500 points on back-to-back days. In just 2 days, the U.S. stock market lost $6 trillion in value. Let that sink in. $6 trillion gone. In 48 hours, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index plummeted 13.2% in a single day. Worst drop since 1997 during the Asian financial crisis. Taiwan's index fell nearly 10%, biggest one-day drop on record in Taiwan's history. Japan's Nikkei dropped close to 8%. Global markets were in absolute freefall, panic everywhere. But what makes this different from 1930 is the speed. The reaction was faster, more synchronized, more devastating. The interconnected global financial system meant the contagion spread at the speed of light. The total crypto market cap dropped 30% from $3.9 trillion in December 2024 to $2.7 trillion by April 2025. Gold surged to all-time highs as terrified investors ran for safety. The VIX, the market fear index, went ballistic by mid-April. U.S. imports from China, worth $438.9 billion in 2024, were collapsing in real time. China decreased its oil imports from the United States by 90%. 90. Chinese companies stopped buying U.S. soybeans entirely. They shifted orders to Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. American soybean farmers, who already lost an estimated $24 billion in exports during the first trade war, were facing catastrophe number 2. The effective tariff rate between the U.S. and China peaked at levels not seen since the 1930s. We went back a century. The Yale Budget Lab calculated the tariffs would cost the average American household $2,400 annually. Every household. Goldman Sachs raised its recession probability from 35% to 45%. J.P. Morgan raised it to 60%. The Peterson Institute estimated U.S. real GDP would shrink by 0.4% long term. That's $125 billion annually in lost economic output. Forever. Not temporary. Permanent. Stage 3 is complete. The escalation happened. The retaliations cascaded exactly as the pattern predicted. The wealth has been destroyed. It's done. Now we're entering stage 4. The decline. And you need to pay attention because this is happening right now, in real time, as you listen to this. The pattern says, once stage 3 completes, economic isolation becomes permanent. Competitors fill the vacuum. The former leader loses dominance. So what's the evidence? What's happening right now that proves we're in stage 4? China's trade surplus with the rest of the world hit $1 trillion in November 2025. While trade with America collapsed, China simply redirected. Chinese exports rose 5.9% from the previous year, despite the tariff war. How is that even possible? How does that make sense? China increased trade with Europe, Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The Belt and Road Initiative, which seemed like a geopolitical vanity project a few years ago, suddenly became China's economic lifeline. They saw this coming. They prepared for this. Meanwhile, Mexico, South Korea, and Vietnam are the biggest winners. Mexico's economy is projected to grow 0.1% larger in the long run, specifically because of the U.S.-China tariff war. Companies are shifting supply chains away from both China and America. They're building factories in neutral territories. The economic geography of the entire world is being redrawn, and America is increasingly on the outside looking in. Think about semiconductors, the same industry that triggered Japan's decline in the 1980s. Taiwan and South Korea now dominate global chip production. The U.S., which pioneered semiconductor technology, which invented the transistor, produces only about 12% of global chips today. 12%. The CHIPS Act, passed in 2022 with $52 billion in subsidies, was supposed to reverse this trend. But here's the fundamental problem nobody wants to talk about. Chips require global supply chains, they require trade, they require cooperation. The average semiconductor passes through 6 different countries during production. You cannot build a semiconductor industry behind tariff walls. It's physically impossible. The physics of global manufacturing don't care about your nationalist rhetoric. They don't care about your slogans. They don't care about making anything great again. The tariffs have raised costs for aluminum, electronics, automotive parts, and rare earth minerals across the board. Companies reported over $35 billion in tariff-related costs. An S&P Global study in October 2025 projected companies would spend $1.2 trillion more in total expenses in 2025 than earlier forecasts. $1.2 trillion. 2/3 of that expense shock, roughly $900 billion, falls directly on consumers through higher prices. You're paying for this right now, whether you realize it or not, every time you buy something. And here's the part that should absolutely terrify you if you understand economics. U.S. manufacturing output did expand by 2.5% under the tariffs. That sounds good, right? That sounds like it's working, until you realize what it cost. Construction output contracted by 3.8%, agriculture declined by 0.3%, mining and extraction fell by 1.6%. Advanced manufacturing, the high-tech industries America desperately needs to compete in the 21st century, declined by 3.3%. Let me say that again. We're protecting low-value manufacturing while destroying high-value industries. We're saving jobs that pay $30,000 a year while eliminating jobs that pay $100,000 a year. This is economic suicide in slow motion. This is choosing to be poorer on purpose. But the most dangerous part isn't even the immediate damage. It's not the $6 trillion that evaporated. It's not the recession probabilities. It's not the job losses. The most dangerous part is the structural shift happening underneath everything. The foundational changes that once made cannot be easily reversed. When Smoot-Hawley destroyed global trade in the 1930s, it took World War II to rebuild the international economic order. Think about that. It took the most destructive war in human history to fix what one tariff bill broke. When Britain imposed the Corn Laws, it took 31 years to reverse them. Only a catastrophic famine in Ireland that killed 1 million people forced the change. When Japan faced semiconductor tariffs in the 1980s, it never recovered its position. Never. 40 years later, Japan still hasn't regained what it lost. The pattern shows that once stage 4 begins, it becomes self-reinforcing, like a black hole. The gravity pulls everything in. Trading partners develop new relationships that don't include you. Supply chains get rebuilt around you, not through you. Currency arrangements shift. The dollar's role as the world's reserve currency, which depends entirely on America being the center of global trade, starts to erode. China and Russia are already settling trade in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively discussing a common currency to bypass the dollar entirely. These aren't just headlines. These aren't just news stories you scroll past. These are structural changes that, once established, cannot be easily reversed. The world is rewiring itself without American permission, without American involvement. Now I can already hear the counter-argument. I know what you're thinking. This time is different. America is too big, too powerful. The dollar is too entrenched. We're the United States of America. We'll be fine. We always are. This is the exact argument people made in 1930. America was the world's largest economy. The dollar was the strongest currency. American industry was unmatched. The future looked unstoppable. And yet, Smoot-Hawley helped turn a recession into the Great Depression and contributed to the rise of totalitarian regimes that led to World War II. It's the exact argument people made in Britain in 1815. Britain ruled the seas. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. The sun never set on the British Empire. They controlled 1/4 of the world's population. And yet the Corn Laws nearly destroyed British economic supremacy until they were repealed in a rare moment of political clarity. It's the exact argument people made in Japan in 1985. Japan was the world's largest creditor nation. Japanese companies dominated electronics, automotive, semiconductors. Everyone thought Japan would overtake America economically by 2000. Business books were written about it. And yet the semiconductor trade war marked the beginning of 3 lost decades that Japan still hasn't recovered from. The pattern doesn't care about your exceptionalism. The pattern doesn't care about your military power. The pattern doesn't care about your historical dominance or your cultural influence. The pattern is pure mechanism. It operates on the cold, hard logic of incentives, retaliations, and mathematical inevitability. When you raise tariffs, trading partners retaliate, not because they want to, not because they're evil, but because their domestic industries demand it. Their politicians face the exact same pressure you do. Their workers are scared, Their manufacturers are angry. Their voters want action. When trade collapses, both sides suffer, but the more dependent side always suffers more. When America imports $439 billion from China, but only exports $144 billion to China, who has more to lose in absolute terms? The math isn't complicated. China can replace American customers. Can America replace Chinese suppliers? Not quickly, not cheaply, maybe not at all. When you destroy $6 trillion in stock market wealth in 48 hours, you don't just hurt billionaire investors sipping champagne in penthouses. You destroy retirement accounts, middle-class families watching their 401ks evaporate. You eliminate business investment capital. You crush consumer confidence. The wealth effect is real. When people feel poor, they spend less. When they spend less, companies earn less. When companies earn less, they lay off workers. When workers lose jobs, they spend even less. The deflationary spiral begins. It feeds on itself like a virus. So what happens next if the pattern holds? Let me tell you what's coming. First, the temporary tariff reduction negotiated in May 2025, where both the US and China agreed to roll back tariffs to 10% for 90 days, will fail to become permanent. Mark my words. Why? Because the domestic political incentives haven't changed at all. American manufacturers who benefit from tariffs will continue lobbying for protection. They're making money now. Chinese industries will demand retaliation against any American pressure. Their politicians need to look strong too. Appearing weak is political death in China. The 90-day pause was a pressure relief valve. It bought time. It didn't fix anything. It didn't address the underlying structural problems. Second, other countries will continue filling the vacuum America is leaving. The European Union, despite its own tariff issues with the US, is already negotiating separate trade deals with China. ASEAN countries are deepening their integration with Chinese supply chains. Latin America is choosing sides, and they're not choosing America. America is being systematically isolated from the global trading system it created after World War II. The irony is almost painful to watch. Third, the dollar's dominance will begin a slow, grinding decline. Not next year, not in 5 years, but over the next 2 decades, the world becomes less dollar-dependent. Alternative payment systems emerge and gain traction. Regional currencies strengthen. Digital currencies, whether government-backed or private, gain mainstream adoption. And when the dollar loses its reserve status, when other countries stop needing dollars to buy oil or conduct international trade, America loses the ability to borrow at artificially low rates. The federal debt, currently $36 trillion and growing, becomes fundamentally unsustainable. Interest payments alone will consume the entire federal budget. That's when the real crisis hits. That's when everything breaks. Fourth, American living standards will stagnate or decline. The Yale Budget Lab estimates tariffs will permanently reduce U.S. GDP by 0.4%. That's $125 billion per year, every single year, forever. That's $2,400 per household annually in reduced purchasing power. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs that will never exist, career paths that will never open, innovations that will never happen. This isn't a recession you recover from. This is a permanent reduction in American prosperity, a permanent downgrade in what life in America looks like. Your children will likely be poorer than you. That's not political rhetoric, that's mathematical reality based on the pattern. But here's what you need to understand. The pattern can still be broken. It's not fate, it's not destiny. Britain repealed the Corn Laws in 1846 and extended its economic dominance for another half-century. America repealed Smoot-Hawley's worst provisions through the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act in 1934 and emerged from World War II as the unquestioned superpower, more dominant than ever before. The pattern is not inevitable. It's a mechanism. And mechanisms can be stopped if you understand them and act decisively and quickly. But stopping it requires something very specific, something rare in politics. It requires political leaders to ignore short-term domestic pressure. It requires abandoning the comforting myth that tariffs create prosperity. It requires recognizing that in a globalized world, economic isolation equals economic suicide. It requires courage, real political courage, the kind that gets you attacked by your own party, the kind that might cost you the next election, the kind where you do the right thing knowing you'll be punished for it, that kind of courage. And that's the fundamental problem. The political incentives are completely wrong. American manufacturers want tariffs because they eliminate competition. American workers in declining industries want protection because they're scared and they've been told tariffs will save their jobs. American politicians want to appear tough on China because it polls well, it wins votes. The short-term benefits are concentrated and visible. The long-term costs are diffuse and delayed. Nobody sees the damage until it's too late to stop it. This is exactly why the pattern repeats. This is exactly why stage 4 is inevitable unless something fundamental changes in the political calculation. So here's what I've proven to you today. The 4-stage pattern is real. Stage 1, economic dominance through trade and innovation. Stage 2, protectionist pressure mounts from domestic industries. Stage 3, tariffs trigger retaliation and market collapse. Stage 4, permanent decline and loss of dominance. It's a mechanism. It operates predictably across time and geography. I proved this pattern using 3 historical disasters spanning 2 centuries. Smoot-Hawley in 1930. Global trade collapsed by 66%. The Great Depression deepened catastrophically. It took World War II to rebuild the global economic order. The British Corn Laws. Britain nearly destroyed its economic supremacy until political courage reversed course in 1846. Japan's semiconductor trade war marked the beginning of 3 lost decades and permanent erosion of Japan's global economic position. 3 examples. Different countries, different leaders, different economic systems, same pattern, same outcome, every single time. And I showed you that America is executing the exact same sequence right now. Stage 1 was complete by 1945. Stage 2 occurred from 2018 to 2024. Stage 3 happened in April 2025, when tariffs hit 145%. China retaliated with 125% tariffs. $6 trillion in wealth evaporated in 48 hours, the largest 2-day wealth destruction in American history. Now we're in Stage 4. China's trade with the rest of the world is growing despite losing American markets. American exports are collapsing. Supply chains are being rebuilt without America at the center. The dollar's reserve status is under active, coordinated threat. Economic isolation is becoming permanent. The process is accelerating every single day. And this isn't about politics. This isn't left versus right. This isn't about what you voted for or what you believe. This is about mathematics. This is about the predictable, systematic destruction of economic empires through protectionism and retaliation. The pattern has repeated itself for 2 centuries across different countries, different leaders, different economic systems, different cultures. And it's repeating right now with America. You're watching it happen in real time if you know what to look for. So what do you do with this information? How do you protect yourself? 3 things. Listen carefully. First, understand the machine. You now see the pattern. You understand the mechanism. You understand how this works and where it leads. You will not be caught unaware when the next phase hits, when the next shock comes. Knowledge is the only defense against inevitability. Understanding lets you prepare while others panic. Second, position yourself accordingly. Diversify out of purely dollar-dependent assets. Consider international exposure in your investment portfolio. Understand that American economic dominance is not a law of physics. It's not written in stone. It's a historical circumstance that's changing right now. The world that existed for the past 80 years is ending. A new world is emerging. Position yourself for that new reality, not the old one. Third, demand better from your leaders, from your politicians, from your policymakers, from your fellow citizens. Share this information. Make people understand what's happening. The pattern can be broken, but only through deliberate action and political courage. Only if enough people understand what's at stake and demand change. Because here's the final truth. The pattern says that once Stage 4 begins, it becomes extraordinarily difficult to reverse. The structural changes become embedded in the global system. The trading relationships get rebuilt elsewhere. New partnerships form. New supply chains solidify. The economic geography gets permanently redrawn. And the former economic leader becomes just another country watching from the sidelines as others fill the vacuum it created. America completed Stage 3 in April 2025. The question now is whether Stage 4 becomes permanent and irreversible, or whether, like Britain in 1846, America finds the courage to reverse course before it's too late. The window is closing. Every day that passes, the structural changes become more embedded. The damage becomes harder to undo. New relationships form. Old partnerships dissolve. Every day, reversing course becomes more expensive, more difficult, more politically impossible. If you want to understand how this pattern was originally built, how the global economic system actually works at the foundational level, and what the next 24 months will bring, as Stage 4 unfolds, you need to stay with Money Aftermath. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell. Because what I've shown you today is just the surface. The machine is far more complex, far more interconnected than most people realize, and I'm going to show you exactly how it operates, piece by piece, mechanism by mechanism, until you see the entire structure with perfect clarity. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you see the pattern now. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what's coming, because the more people who understand this, the more pressure there is to change course before it's too late. The pattern is absolute. The mechanism is real. The history is undeniable. And Stage 4 is already here, unfolding right now while most people aren't even paying attention. Don't be one of them. Understand what's happening. Position yourself accordingly. And demand better before the window closes forever. This is Money Aftermath, and I'll see you in the next one.